What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the One Family Martial Arts Podcast, where we recognize the unique insights and experiences of martial artists from all backgrounds. I'm Ash, Master Level Instructor of Yichen, the Martial Art of Awareness, and student of Grandmaster Sam Chen. Today, we have a special guest, Jason Liao. Jason has an extensive background in martial arts, beginning with his training under Sifu George Ling Hu from 2009 to 2015, where he focused on long fist basics and Bagua Xingyi. Then he transitioned he expanded his expertise training Gong Bao Tian Bagua under Eugene Zhou from 2015 to 18, and later developing into Hop Gar with the late great David Chin. After closing his sushi restaurant, Jason returned to George Ling Hu in 2015 to focus on Bajiquan. He then transitioned into private security and now trains military, law enforcement, and private security personnel. Jason's eclectic and dedicated martial arts experience make him an incredible addition to our show. Jason, thanks for speaking with me today.
Hi. Just a quick correction on the dates. I was with George Ling Hu from, let's see, I was born in 88. It was 1997 to around 2004. So I started when I was 9 years old. So 2000 up to around 2004. From 2004 to around 2006 was when I was with Eugene Chow. And then I was with David Chin from 2006 to around 2000, 5 years after 2000, to around 2011. And then I returned to Sifu at 2015. Here we go.
Oh, okay.
So I started.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I must have had some mistakes in my notes, but thank you for correcting that. So,
yeah, no problem.
One of the things that kind of interests me right now, topic of discussion, and you're a good guest to discuss this with a little bit more of some amateur sociology, if you will. So, as a member of the Chinese diaspora, I would just like to hear your thoughts on, first of all, for anybody that hasn't heard the term Chinese diaspora before, if you could explain that from your point of view. And then let's talk a little bit about your experience as a member of the diaspora training Chinese martial arts in the United States and how the two informed each other.
That is actually a very good question, because how do I put this? First of all, I was the first person that my Sifu taught Baji trend to. And when I went back to Taiwan, I went back and I visited some leading masters of the art there, just to like announce myself to the community the last time I was in Taiwan. And I would say that this is actually a pretty complicated question, because there's a cultural background, there's like our upbringing. It makes us look at things different ways, right? And the thing about Chinese martial arts, the way it's taught and trained traditionally, is very much overseas anyway, I found, is very much in a box. And what I mean by that is that the teacher tells you to do something, you just do it. There's no thought process of questioning, because that's against the Confucian cultural background of, Chinese education.
Right.
Whereas in America, one, recognizing and knowing the culture behind it, but I would say that in America, you have more of a free will and you have more of an out of the box thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So my Sifu would put it this way, just to make things clear, is that if he had stayed in Taiwan, his level of understanding and skill would not be where it is today. The fact that he was able to train outside of these other people's expectations and understand things and teach outside these other people's expectations has pushed him to a different level than his peers in Taiwan.
Right.
That's
I mean,
the
that kind of goes back to, like Bruce Lee's criticisms about the classical mess, right?
right. And the thing is, my Sifu trained a variety of systems under most of like the top guys from Taiwan in this time period. But the thing was, he wasn't there to like kiss ass to the teachers and like learn their curriculum. He wanted to learn their essence, like the specialty of their system, how to use it, right? So for him, he saw from an early stage that he divided in his head that when training a system, you have training method, performance method, and you have usage. He had no interest in learning performance method. And by performance method, I mean like a lot of people would say, I know Baji train, I know Wing Chun. They know how to perform the sets. They look good doing it. But when things go live, everything falls apart,
Right.
right? So he wanted how to use it and he wanted how to train the skill behind it. And so with his teachers, in a lot of ways, my teachers, Chinese martial arts is like Chinese mixed martial arts because he picked up certain things from different teachers. And he trains his students with his inner door students. Like for us, we all more or less specialize in what he thinks we're going to be good at. So I have brothers that, they just train my Sifu's Bagua, or they just train my Sifu's Xingyi, et cetera, et cetera. Right? He was able to dissect everything out. And the reason why he was able to do that was because he was able to come to America he came to America when he was a little bit younger than me. And he was able to dissect and train things with a more of a free mind than he otherwise would have if he were still living in Taiwan under that box, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
Right. So as an American born Chinese, one thing I would say is that the Chinese aspect of things does help in certain ways because when you start talking about the internal spiritual stuff, growing up a Buddhist, it gave me a point of reference. It gave me an idea of, pointed me in a direction where, because my Sifu is a Buddhist as well, when we talk about the center and all those things, I already had an idea of what he was talking about, which is not something that's common with Western students,
Right.
unless you practice that mindset. Um, it's I feel like definitely both sides, being American born and being brought up in the Chinese culture, gave me a full picture of what I was training. Whereas with a pure Western student, because of a Western mindset, will look at things a different way and cannot get certain sides of the training because they don't have a point of reference to understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the language, you tend to think in the language. And
Right.
so, that helps to shape, your worldview and your thought processes. And I mean, I know that in the 20 years that I've had with, my Sifu, also a member of the diaspora, uh, you know, uh, ethnic Hakka born in Malaysia, I've had a lot of, you know, uh, funny and heartwarming experiences where you think, people are people, it doesn't matter where you're from. And then I've also had some more, difficult or challenging experiences where you start to understand that there can be some pretty significant differences, and perspective on the world and thought processes. And so yeah, that's, like I said, that's one of the reasons why, just as I'm reflecting back on my career in Chinese martial arts so far, that it's a, sort of an interesting subject for me.
I get that because I think about that a lot too. I tend to agree with what you mean because with my Sifu, he's always like, true kung fu and learning like fajin and stuff like that knows no nationality. There's anybody can learn it. And the thing is, I've encountered just because you're Chinese doesn't mean you're going to get it. And I've met a lot of so-called quote unquote Sifus, right? In the Houston Chinese martial arts community, despite my relatively young age and compared to these other guys, um, I, I rub shoulders with like all the senior masters out here in Texas. And because, well, my Sifu's 83 and a lot of people look up to him because, he has information they don't. And with talking with a lot of these guys, you start realizing just because you're Chinese doesn't mean you're going to get it. Just because you're not Chinese doesn't mean you're going to not get it. Like some of my closest friends, one, for example, is Longshan lineage, Eagle Claw disciple Rodney Littles, close friend of mine, African American. And one thing he tells me, and the thing is like for him, he was already on this path trying to figure things out on a deeper level. And when we started hanging out again, like we spoke the same language. He was able to level up really quickly because he understood what I was talking about. And one thing he said to me was like, you know, the way Western instructors try to tell me things, sometimes I just don't get it. But when an old master just goes Chinese on me, they can barely speak the language, thick accent, whatever else. For some reason, I understand that better. And things click in his head, right? So
Yeah.
it's not about the race, but there are certain things about Eastern and Western thought processes that need to be balanced. I feel like it's very helpful in the process of learning the big picture of Chinese martial arts.
Yeah, I think, kind of coming back to what you were just saying about Rodney's perspective, um, my Sifu, he'll say that, oh, my English is not that good. So I choose my words very carefully, right? So he's always trying to be, sort of direct and to the point, but what he says is what he means. So in a sense that sort of when you strip out some of the nuance of the language, because like he's teaching in a second language, it's like he's just trying to be as uh, concise as possible, right?
Right.
And then so sometimes that can be a blessing. So let me ask you another question while we're on this subject. Uh, Again, just speaking purely from your own experience, how much do you think the Japanese occupation of Taiwan affected the mindset and the culture around martial arts happening in Taiwan, say, like versus the mainland?
That's a good question. I'm not my grandma, well, my grandparents were around at that time period. Um, I don't have enough insight to that, uh, so to speak. So from my understanding, right, my family is from the Zhang Liao line. So the bigger family within our family lineage is the Chang family, Zhang family. If you read Brian Kennedy's book, he mentions that the Zhang Liao family brought uh, a lot of the southern Shaolin from the Fujian province to southern Taiwan over 2 centuries ago. And from my understanding, I am a descendant of that line. But when it got to my grandfather and my father's time, they were already not practicing. Whereas the martial arts I learned under my Sifu is post 1940s Taiwan, which is when the Northerners escaped China to go to Taiwan and taught that generation of people. I don't have any direct experience with what was going on pre that time. So I wouldn't be able to say how the Japanese influenced how martial arts was taught in Taiwan because there were different time periods and different things that were taught, if that makes sense. Like the Southern systems, more or less from what I understand, were kept within families and kept within certain villages. As far as I'm aware, they kept it pretty tight knit and they consciously did not allow outside influence in their teaching. So I would say, like, in those time periods, no matter if it was communist China taking over China or Japan taking over Taiwan, the ones that were closed door training were closed door training. They were keeping things very tight and they refused to bow down to how other people would try to influence them because that's always been the mindset of true Chinese martial arts lineages, right? Like, we don't let outsiders in on this stuff. So
Right.
we're not going to let them influence how we teach it. So I would like to think that's what they were doing at that time.
Right. Okay. So let's transition a little bit now and start talking more specifically about Baji. So let's assume that anybody who's going to be watching has no prior knowledge of Baji and take us right from the beginning.
So Baji trend, due to its history, has been nicknamed the bodyguard system of Chinese martial arts. If you look at more recent Chinese history, the last emperor of China, Hu Yi, uh, Chiang Kai-shek that went to Taiwan, as well as communist leader Mao Zedong, all three of their personal bodyguards were disciples of the same master, Li Suwen. The system itself is very close quarters. Baji means the 8 extremities: head, shoulders, elbows, hands, hips, back, knees, and feet. So, whereas other systems of combat, when they divide out their striking, blocking, throwing, things of that nature, you have this is a punch, this is a kick. Whereas with Baji, every time you move, you think about, let's say, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu or a football takedown, for instance. You're rushing down the opponent. Now, in Baji, the method of combat is rushing down your opponent and striking with all parts of your body. So instead of trying to take your opponent down, it's a knockdown, territory control system of martial arts. And the primary focus of Baji in the training aspect of things is training fajin, or exploding energy. So as soon as you move and you make contact, you're trying to make a one-hit kill. So if you think as a bodyguard, you're not, different systems of combat have different tactical approaches. With Baji, it's as soon as I make contact with the threat, he has to go down. Right? I don't have time to square off with them. I don't have time to take them down, submit them. I don't have time to lock, do this, do that, do that. It's very efficient. So it's move, I make contact, I explode, the guy's down. I take my protectee to safety. That's how I approach teaching the combat side of things to Baji.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, from the degree that I'm familiar with Baji, I mean, it seems very much like what you're saying, that it's about the primary focus seems to very much be about me using my mass to displace your mass and very close quarters.
So we would say I use my frame to displace your frame. So we do a lot of Zhuang exercises where it's in every martial art, we talk about a center line, right? So you have your center line where your three centers, the three dantian, upper, middle, lower, align. And you're aligning your center to your eight extremities. So every time you move, your body's framed, right? Because you can have somebody that has big mass, but their frame's not aligned because they don't train it. Through standing practice, through breathing, the qigong, and everything else, when your body is unified, your frame is unified, and you're able to explode the frame. I'm displacing my frame with, I'm displacing your frame with my frame. I'm taking over the territory, and I'm taking over your space. You're out of commission. I'm still standing. I can continue my job. Whether it is I follow up to finish you, or it's I needed to get my protectee to safety, or I didn't get myself to safety, right? So it's there's a lot of hard Qigong practice and a lot of connectivity practice, tendon changing practice, because you're unifying your body to work a certain way. And it's not something that you just turn on like when you need to use it. It's your day to day, right? When you move, when you do this, do that, your body is already in that mode.
Can you give some more details about like what the training method looks like, and just you mentioned some terms, zhang and qigong, and the tendon changing, like the yi jing type training. Can you expand on some of that?
See, I'm not really in a space like physical or anything right now, but I'll
Right.
try to explain verbally, right? So, okay. So for my Sifu, when we first started training the horse, a lot of people think about training the horse stance where they're trying to sit down, they're trying to sink, et cetera, et cetera. They're trying to like drop their body mass down. Whereas when my Sifu teaches it, he calls that a dead horse. That's useless. He goes, that's like sitting on a toilet. For us, when we drop into the horse stance, our legs are ready to run. We don't call it a horse stance, we call it horse riding stance. So think about you're riding a horse and you're gauging all your inner thigh muscles on the horse while it's moving, right? And he calls that ready to run. Now, when you train that, there's a couple of things going on. He's always talking about spatial awareness. You're not just there trying to stand there, dropping your mass. You have to be in control of that point in territory. That is your starting point, and you have to be ready to move in any direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I
So,
mean, we have some, very similar concept, where Sifu talks about like a readiness of six direction energy. You need to be able to change level, move forward, backward, left, right. So it's like we never try to root like into the ground.
right. And there's a very different outcome when you train horse with an intention. And when I first started training my Sifu, like my mind was all over this Baji stuff. And then it got to a point where, because luckily I have a job, like I always had a job where I was always on my feet. I was working behind a sushi bar. And it got to a point like a couple weeks in where I was like, wait a minute, when I'm standing here, I am already in a high horse stance, right? And I started programming that thought process of spatial awareness and thinking like a bodyguard, right? Knowing who's around me, what's around me, things of that nature, where it wasn't like this only turns on when I'm training. No, it's like when I'm in my natural state of things, all these little details were already programming themselves into my day to day. So I was training 24/7, right? The mindset was already being programmed 24/7. I started being aware, like where my balance was, where I was standing, who was around me. And when you're working in a kitchen, people are like running left and right, you know? And I
Right.
had to learn how to move, right? And that all that transitioned to when I started doing personal protection. Well, I already had experience doing that because before I did, when I was working in kitchen, before I started working in kitchens, I worked as a bouncers in bar. So I already knew about like moving around people and things of that nature. My training goes way back. So this was nothing new to me. It was just that when I came back to my Sifu and I started training in Baji, and I started realizing that I wasn't just taking lessons. This guy was programming the system into me, right? And one thing he said to me very early on in my training, well, actually, I made this realization, went back to him and told him, because when I first came back to him and trained it, I was in a hiatus. Like I was very focused on my restaurant career. So there were a couple years after I was training under David Chin where I wasn't training and I was just like, focused on cooking, etc. When I came back to him, it was because after I closed my first restaurant, I felt lost. And one of the guys that used to work under me was a Chen Tai Chi disciple under Blues to Tango. We used to go out back behind the restaurant every time after service, and he would just whip my ass. And he was like, "Yo, you lost your center. Like, you need to figure out, you know, it's not about the cooking. Like, there's something missing in you." And I was reading the comic book Kenji. It was written by my grand teacher's Japanese student about a kid who learns Baji trend from his grandfather. And there's like all these things about the system that drew me to it, the nobility of the system, et cetera, et cetera. But I went back to my Sifu. Uh, I was, you know, I was a big name chef that just lost his restaurant. I wanted something. I knew I had to get back into training to find my center again, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. But after a couple weeks of training, I went back to him and I was like, I realized that you're not just teaching me, you know, to be able to do the system. Like you're training me in the spirit of the system. I was like, in order for me to truly get the Baji trend, I have to be able to think and qualify as a professional bodyguard, right? That was a baseline. You know what I mean? The
Mhm.
system was shaping my psyche and the way I thought, the way I did things, and everything along the lines like of who I was. So every day, like no matter what I did from that point on, it was like, what was my mindset? How was I standing? What position I was in when I was sitting, standing, laying down, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Everything came from a Baji frame of mind.
Yeah, makes sense. You want to, you don't, like Sifu, my Sifu, he says, don't train up the system. You use the system to train up yourself, right? It's a, yeah, at a certain point, it's not something you do anymore. It's something you are.
Exactly. So I started to, my Sifu would say, and this is why I'm so close to him as opposed to like other people that trained with him throughout his history of teaching, is that I put my life into training the system, to embody the system, right? To embody the Kung Fu. Whereas with other people, he considers hobbyists. And I would say that there is a huge, huge difference between somebody that practices martial arts and somebody that is a martial artist. Does it make sense? There's
Yeah.
a difference,
Right.
right? And I had that seed implanted into me a long time ago when I was a kid. But when I came back to my Sifu was when it really started to come out, where it was like, okay, my life has a direction. This is how I'm going to live my life. This is who I'm going to be. Right.
Right. Can you give us expand a little bit more on sort of just the overall structure of the system in terms of like basic exercises, forms, partner training, the relative, like let's say proportion that you spend training on each of those types of things, and what does a little bit of what does that look like in practice?
So there is a uniqueness to our lineage of Baji. Like I said, um, my Sifu had no intentions of teaching Baji. Uh, he learned it to understand exploding power, to weaponize the Tai Chi trend he was training back in the day. So under Grandmaster Liu Yingqiao, he had a very big organization that you're going to see globally. It was called Wu-Tan. And they have a certain way of training things. But for us, one thing unique about our lineage is we did away with having to train forms. Okay. Traditionally in Baji, you have 3 forms. Small frame, Xiao Baji, where you train the form very slowly, like deep breathing, slow moving. They call it dead frame, which is where you're structuring your body. The whole point of the form is to train your body to align and connect to those 8 points through the Qigong, through the breathing, through the movement, et cetera, et cetera. It's a slow moving form. Large frame, they also call moving frame, which is when once you've developed that small frame, you can start moving your body with combat speed, right? You start moving, you have bigger movements where instead of going slow and then going in, breathing, and et cetera, you have these big movements where you're like, you're going straight into it. So those are how the form functions. They're relatively short forms. That takes about 1 minute each to perform. 6 large openings, 六大开. These are the actual combat applications, which are essentially like Xingyi's 5 elements, single movements, right? You have Kaoda, body checking. You have Bongquan, the straight punch. You have collapsing palm. Those movements, everything is trained like line drills, just like Xingyi's 5 elements. Now, when we start talking about it, it becomes a little more detailed. I would say that these 6 movements are 6 methods of breaching the opponent. Okay, this is where you learn the fajin and everything else. My Sifu's definition of 六大开, 6 large openings, is a little different from people from the main line. His understanding, his own 体会, his own analysis of it is 6 large openings is a way to describe the fajin, the explosive energy, right? In Baji trend, they talk about 3 major types of energy, ways to explode energy. The first one we call rebound force, dropping jin, which is you have your dantian and you rebound it off the ground. So you have your whole body, your whole mass, you're dropping in, you have that drop, right? You have the left, right, which is your front and back hands, your upper body is going 2 different directions. You're not just hitting with one side, you're hitting front, back, right? Then you have the coiling energy. Some people think of it like Chen Tai Chi, where it's like you're coiling your body, etc. We don't see it that way. We see it as when you have this up, down, right, left, right, and the front, back. Because front, back, when you're hitting in motion, right? You're in transition. So when you have that drop, you have that front, back evening itself out when you get to your point. Okay, and that creates a spiral energy from the dropping and crossing energies, right? So you have your up, down, your left, right, and your front, back. That is the 6 large openings for him. Does that make sense? Instead of just 6 movements, it's an energy transfer.
Yeah.
Oh, I went through the forms. I came back to him, and I was like, because when I first came back to him, he had me train 弹丝 train. What do you call it? We call it coiling blast. There's videos of me doing it a lot on my side gate Bajiquan page and in my Facebook. Unfortunately, I'm not in a space right now where I can like,
All right.
do this. But it was essentially this movement, right? The contract expand movement. He had me do that for 3 months straight. Now, that movement to us is the bread and butter. It's the core C technique of the system that teaches everything. It teaches you entry, how to go in, and it teaches you how to explode out. Because once you have the bone trend, then you have the elbow, you have the palm, everything else. But you have to get that contract expand down to be able to enter in on an opponent. On top of that, in Xingyi and Baji, the spear is the mother weapon of the system. And I don't mean spear fighting, right? A lot of people train weapons and they train to fight with a weapon. Like, oh, I can swing a spear around and hit people. That is not what it is to us. It's a training tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with the spear, you have lan, na, sa, and then the pullback. Like for me, I train with a 8-pound, 10-foot long spear. Okay. Holding the end of the spear, sending out and pulling it back, that pullback motion, boom, that sit back is what trains the power behind the bone trend. And it trains that dropping energy and that horizontal energy, pulling something like that, spiraling it back. Does it make sense?
I think so.
So for us, when we developed, we didn't call ourselves Wu-Tan. My Sifu was like, we're not doing this the way they do it conventionally. Because in Wu-Tan, they train a lot of different systems, right? Mantis, Bagua, Baji, and they put it all back in. Like, and there's like a whole curriculum that they have to go through. And for my Sifu, he was like, he would say, 到哪一年去? Like, how many years it's going to take to get somebody to get it, doing all that, right?
Right.
So for us, during that time frame, I decided to pare down the system. And I realized, I was like, I can teach how to do the small frame, building the frame. I can teach them how to move the frame, and I can teach them how to fajin. But I don't need them to spend years trying to memorize the curriculums of the form. I can teach this through line drills. So I came back to my Sifu and I broke it down to 8 straight line movements and 8 offline movements, very much along the lines of how Xingyi is laid out, right? You have the 5 elements and you have the 12 animals that are variations off of that. And the way I looked at it was I have 8 straight line movements that are direct lines of attack, which is before you learn how to move off center, you have to learn how to move along the center, right? Or for us, it's as bodyguards, we have to learn how to ambush the center. I call it ambushing the center. And so they're very straight line attacks. It's just, like the bone trend, the elbow, like the famous elbow, the body checking, the collapsing palm. Those are the first 4, right? Those are the bread and butter techniques that I was training the first 6 months. And then we have coiling, up, down movement, stuff like that. Those are my first 8. And those are what I call the straight lines of attack. And then I have other 8 lines of attack that move offline. And the reason why we do that, one, is, we all know, like, if we have a complete martial arts training, even Xingyi doesn't just move straight. Like, once you start programming the Baguan, you have to be able to move offline. But for me, the way I saw it was all this stuff is teaching me how do I ambush their center when I'm not on the line of attack? What if they're coming up my protectee? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What if somebody's the side of me and I have to intercept? But I have to intercept with the same force I am going in straight in. Right?
Right.
So I went back to my Sifu and I was like, I can have them develop all the gong, all the power a lot more efficiently by teaching them these movements and have them be able to use it right away and then refine it as they go, rather than following the traditional way, like the in-box way of doing things, where it's like, okay, you have to do this for X amount of years before I show you this and I show you that. I was like, screw that. I'm training operators. I'm not training, somebody to go on stage and perform and show how good my system is. Right.
I mean, you're working with people that have a limited time frame to be able to be effective, and with catastrophic consequences for failure.
Exactly. But on top of that, what I realized is doing it like that, doing things like that does not mean I throw out the nuances and the details of doing the system. It's still very refined, right? There's still a lot of deep content to how we train. It's just that from the get-go, from day one, I'm trying to get them to be able to be effective as soon as possible.
Right.
Because when you're effective with a system, because one thing that people don't realize is learning and training a system is a give and take. The teacher teaches, but you have to be able to process the information. Now, if you're just somebody that just takes in the Sifu's information and you just do it because he tells you to do it, and you're not processing why it's there, it's going to take you forever. You're never going to, as my Sifu would put it, in Chinese martial arts, a lot of it is you being enlightened through the training, which means that you have to put in self-work. Now, if you're coming to me to learn a fighting system, and I'm teaching you, and I'm showing you right off the bat that it's effective, and now you know it's effective, and you know you have to use it. When I start putting in the other details, you are able to accelerate your learning a lot faster because you have that point of reference in your head already. Whereas with a lot of teachers, it's like, go stand in this horse stance, do 8 breaths, and just keep breathing. Do it for 6 months. Why? Right?
Right.
Why am I doing this? Then I'm going to show you this. Then I'm going to show you that. Then finally, I'm going to show you how to use everything. But you've wasted all that time. If from day one, you know and you see what the movement is for, that shortens your time to be able to refine it and make it your own. Right?
Right.
Instead of like 3 to 7 years of guesswork.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you can, if somebody needs to be able to get some work done right now, you can hand them a machete, and then they've got, they can be effective right now, and you've got a whole lifetime left to whittle it down to a scalpel, to where they can do, the deep refinements on the training.
And the thing is, the way I saw it as well, to be completely honest, like a lot of Baji people out there ride on the reputation of the system. When I see their students even though Baji, relatively speaking, as far as traditional Chinese martial arts goes, they've retained their reputation for a reason. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of people, even after all these years, are still clueless on how to actually use it. Because there are certain things that I'm looking for. Like, just like any vehicle, the engine needs to run a certain way, right? Tactically speaking, the system needs to move a certain way. And I still see a lot of Baji guys try to force a shape into an application, and or they revert to kickboxing. And we've seen all this with a lot of systems of martial arts, right?
Right.
They'll straight punch and they'll be like, "Oh, you see, this is from the form." And then you look at the mechanics, and it's like, that's all wrong. That shows me that you don't have the complete picture, you know? So even if like the students I've taught over the years, even if they look shit ugly doing the form, look shit ugly doing the movement, their intention is there. They're using the principles of what I taught and they get the job done. You know,
Right.
I have former MMA fighters that I've trained, um, military guys with martial arts backgrounds, you know, law enforcement guys with former backgrounds, like even the ones that I haven't trained from the ground up, and I just show them how to move. They get the idea. They're able to affect what I have to teach. Now, their power development is going to take some time, but at least they're able to use their mass to, like you say, displace somebody else's mass to get the job done.
All right. Let me ask you real quick about what would your tips be on developing good fudging?
That is, that's hard to explain in words because for us, the way we do it, right, we start by building the body's frame. Because in order to fajing, your body needs to be a reflector. It needs to be able to be, your joints and everything else need to be connected so that the power channels go through. So when they talk about fajing, there are two things. There is bone structure and tendon structure that need to be developed. A lot of people, when they work out, they only work out on muscular structure. Now, muscles, that like we know, as we grow older, muscles deteriorate. Chinese martial arts is very tied to Chinese medicine in the sense that it talks about the tendons, it talks about the sinews, the fascia, right? For us, we do the Zhanzhuang, we do the small heavenly circle breathing, right? The cycle, the small heavenly circle cycle. You build a root with your lower basin because if you think about Fajing, it's like shooting a cannon, right? If your cannon doesn't have a strong base,
Right.
it's not going to
Can't
shoot
sh
right.
Yeah, you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe.
You can't shoot a cannon from canoe, exactly. So you have to have, first of all, a strong lower basin to be able to rebound the force off the ground and not lose your balance, to send it back out, right? Two, in Chinese medicine, they say the jing comes from the bone marrow, which means that your body's frame needs to align properly and your joints need to be able to transfer the force. Now, it's it's hard for me not to talk about qi because in my experience, qi is energy you build up that you explode out for fajing. And so that qi buildup, it just comes through time. Like that, being able to flow that energy comes through practice and training, right? In the beginning, you force the movements. You exert the movements forcefully, right? So in the beginning in Baji, they call it hard frame because in my experience, in my own training, in the beginning, it was easy for me because I could feel the power that I was trying to express. So I was going hard, right? I was exploding out with like intention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it got to the point where it was wearing my body out. So that was the Mingjing stage, the obvious power stage. That was when my Sifu started programming a lot of Tai Chi concepts into my training to soften up, uh, to soften up my frame to be able to do the Anjing, the hidden power stuff,
Right.
right? And I can't write a textbook and tell somebody, hey, look, this is how you fajing. Like, fajing is life force. Like, you kind of have to feel it. But the stages of training, I can tell you right now, is in the beginning, you try to express it the best way you know how. And that's the obvious stage of things. You go hard. And then that's when you start tapping into the more internal side of things of how to more efficiently transfer energy without wearing yourself out.
Right. So just briefly, because we're coming up on the end of our time here, but I don't think we touched on, I had some questions about the origins of Baji and the founder. I don't think we touched on that at all.
So the history is that a Taoist priest taught a Chinese Muslim of the Wu family uh, of the Tangzhou region in northern China. And the system was heavily developed by Chinese Muslims before it split into the Han families. I don't really care like so much about the origins, like the specific origins, but I do know that a big part of it is that it was heavily developed by the Chinese Muslims. And one very important fact about that is that if you look at a lot of systems of Chinese martial arts like Tan Tui, Xingyi Liu He Quan, Baji, what they call like the brutal systems of Chinese martial arts, they were very much kept and developed by the Chinese Muslim community. And I say that's extremely important because they were oppressed people, right? And they were always like ready for wartime type of people. Whereas other systems of Chinese martial arts kind of became more of a dog and pony show or, you know, flowery, so to speak,
Right.
right? Whereas Muslim systems were always meant for combat. And some of the most destructive like systems of Chinese martial arts systems that exist today were developed by the Chinese Muslim community, Baji being one of them.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't like super clear on the origins of Baji, and I couldn't remember if there was any direct connection to like Xingyi Quan or
So
because it seems like there's some parallels there anyway.
there's stories that say that there were like some very key figure Xingyi guys that started doing Baji. Um, the way my Sifu puts it, like if you just ignore, you know, supposed history, right? Xingyi and Baji are without a doubt very much related systems. Whether intentional or not doesn't matter. Like what it's training is essentially the same thing,
Mhm.
especially at the higher levels, the same thing. My Sifu's a Xingyi guy as well. Like he just says the way Baji trains, it's kind of like the bad boy brother, right?
All right.
It's a more the the bad intent that you're trying
It's
to
the
inflict.
dirt.
Yeah,
It's the dirty boxing of the Chinese martial arts world.
exactly, exactly.
Uh, so when you guys are doing the Jianzhuang, what's the time frame on that look like? Do you guys do like long periods of standing or?
Um, the period of time is not so much important as uh how you do it. So for me, my friends say I'm crazy and I train like Goku on Dragon Ball Z. When I do my Zhanzhuang now, I wear a 40-pound weighted vest when I do my horse stance.
Hmm.
And I will do small heavenly circle breathing, large heavenly circle breathing. I would do a minimum of 18 breaths, take a break, come back and do it. I won't do it for long periods of time. I'll do it until I find a feeling, right? I'll do it, I would say just like a couple minutes at a time and then come back to it.
Okay.
Uh, Doing with the weighted vest really does force, if you do it too early in your training and your frame is not there yet, you're just going to hurt yourself. But once you get to a point where you know you find the connection, you know what you're looking for, I would say that really, really accelerates your power output because you're training that lower basin to handle your frame, handle that weight. So when I just do a normal horse stance now, I really don't feel much um, stress, so to speak.
Okay. Very cool. So how frequently are you teaching workshops with your Sifu? I've seen a few clips. I'm not sure like exactly how frequently that's happening.
I'm trying to do it more due to my job line of work. Like there hasn't been um, a lot of times where I could put something together. I actually had to cancel like the last two workshops I was planning to do. Uh, I have military students that fly down and stay with me for a couple of days at a time. If I'm around certain people, I'll do an impromptu teaching sessions. Uh, I just haven't had the time to like really put together. I'm trying to get into teaching more frequently. Right now, like people come to me for private lessons through word of mouth. I'm trying to be more visible over the course of the next couple of years as my career starts stabilizing. So you're going to see more of that. I'm going to make myself more available. But because I work in the bodyguard field of things and things are always so imminent, where it's like, we need you tomorrow night for this or that, it's like,
Right, right.
crap, I have to cancel this, I have to cancel that. So right now, like as a field operative, it's harder for me to like set times to teach. But as my schedule becomes a little more clear with this new company I'm signing on with, I'm going to at least try to, well, my teacher's 83 and he's starting to hand off like all the seminars being taught in tournaments in Houston to me. So starting next year, I know for a fact that I'm going to teach a workshop at the tournament, which I've done before. It used to be under his supervision. Now he's just like, it's all you. So yeah, it's a work in progress. I have some private students, I have military students. I haven't really made myself available to the public in that regard yet, but I'm working on it.
Very cool. If people are interested in taking some private lessons from you, how can they get in touch with you and find out more?
You can message me through the Sidegate Baji Trend Facebook page or email me at Sidegate, Sidegate, Bajiquan, Bajiquan at gmail.com. Shoot me an email. I'm good about responding. If you live out of town and just want to call me, have some questions, I have quite a few people actually find me through the Sidegate Baji Trend Facebook page and message me and reach out to me through that as well. So yeah, like I'm open to answering any questions. I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, this is secret, that is secret. But just keep in mind, there are certain questions that can only be answered through the training. And not every question I get has an easy answer too.
Yeah.
So that's just how it is out here. That's just
Right,
how it
right,
is with content.
right. I get that. All right, Jason. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate speaking with you today. I had it's an enlightening conversation for me, and hopefully this helps to get a little bit more exposure for your future endeavors as far as being able to share the art of Baji with people who might really need it.
Definitely.
All right, bro. I appreciate you. We'll wrap up here,
No
and
problem.
we'll stay. Yeah, we'll stay in touch.